The chamber had been designed to make every visitor feel small. 14 ascending tiers of curved obsidian desks rose around the central floor like the inside of a colossal shell. Each level held a delegation, ambassadors, advisors, analysts, representatives of civilizations that had stretched their reach across light years and centuries. The air shimmered faintly with translation fields, turning dozens of alien languages into a single shared understanding. Above them, the vaulted ceiling glowed with slow-moving constellations, a symbolic map of the Council's authority. Every star represented a member world. Every line between them marked a treaty, an alliance, or a boundary dispute that had been argued here until compromise emerged. For 3 centuries, the Galactic Council Chamber had served as the political heart of known space. Empires had risen and collapsed beneath its golden lights. Wars had been prevented with a sentence spoken across its polished floor. And occasionally, a civilization had been judged. Today was one of those days. The delegates arrived gradually, their entrances quiet but purposeful. The towering insectoid representatives of the Karate Directorate folded their armored limbs into seats designed centuries earlier for creatures half their size. The aquatic envoys of the pelagic combine sat within transparent life support cylinders, faint currents moving through the water around them. Near the upper tiers, the crystalline forms of the Ardal Syndicate refracted the chamber lights into shimmering fragments across the walls. Every species carried its history with it into the room. Every species understood the weight of the institution they served. The chamber filled with a low murmur of diplomatic conversation, formal greetings, strategic whispers, subtle evaluations of posture and tone. At the center floor, one seat remained conspicuously simple: the human delegation desk. It was smaller than most of the others. Humans were still classified as an observer civilization, which meant they could attend proceedings, speak when invited, and participate in certain trade forums. But they did not vote. They did not influence the Council's central decisions. They were present. Nothing more. Ambassador Layla Okafor arrived precisely 7 minutes before the session began. She crossed the chamber floor without escort, her footsteps soft against the polished stone. Compared to many of the Council's delegates, she seemed almost fragile, just a single human woman in a dark diplomatic uniform, carrying a slim data tablet beneath one arm. But she moved with the quiet assurance of someone who had attended this chamber many times before. She took her seat, placed the tablet on the desk, and began reading. The action itself was unremarkable. Around her, however, the room watched. Not openly. The Galactic Council had perfected the art of observation without appearing to observe. Several delegates glanced toward the human desk with the same restrained curiosity that scholars might give an unfamiliar specimen. Humans had been observers for 41 years. Long enough to be familiar. Not long enough to be fully trusted. 3 tiers above Okafor, Councillor Verith of the Thalran Union studied the chamber with calm satisfaction. Verith had the tall, slender frame common to his species, his pale skin almost luminous beneath the chamber's golden light. His long fingers rested lightly against the desk as the room settled into quiet anticipation. He had spent weeks preparing this session. Months, if one counted the groundwork. Politics, he often said, was not the art of argument. It was the art of timing. The Council's presiding officer signaled the opening of proceedings. The chamber lights dimmed slightly. A gentle resonance filled the air as the translation systems synchronized across the chamber. Delegates, the officer announced, today's session concerns the review motion submitted by the Thalran Union regarding the continued observer status of the Terran Confederation. A ripple of interest moved through the tiers. Not surprise. The proposal had been circulating through diplomatic channels for weeks. But hearing it spoken in the chamber transformed rumor into reality. Verith rose slowly. He did not hurry. Authority never hurried. The chamber fell silent. Even the ambient whisper of the translation fields seemed to fade as he stepped forward to address the Council. "Esteemed delegates," Verith began, his voice smooth and measured. "For decades this institution has welcomed emerging civilizations into its orbit. We observe them. We study their development. And when the time is appropriate, we grant them deeper participation in the governance of interstellar affairs." His gaze moved across the chamber. Each delegate felt briefly included in the speech. Humanity, he continued, was granted observer status 41 years ago under precisely these principles. A few heads turned toward the human desk. Okafor did not look up. She continued reading the document on her tablet. Vareth allowed the silence to stretch. Then he continued. In that time, the Terran Confederation has demonstrated remarkable enthusiasm for interstellar engagement. The pause before the final phrase was deliberate. A polite insult disguised as diplomacy. However, Vareth said, enthusiasm is not the same as readiness. The chamber listened. Humanity's political structures remain unstable. Its economic footprint remains marginal. Its interstellar governance experience remains limited when compared with the civilizations represented in this chamber. He folded his hands behind his back. For these reasons, the Thalran Union proposes a temporary suspension of human observer privileges pending a full developmental review. The words landed softly, but their implications echoed loudly. Suspension. Removal. Isolation. Across the chamber, quiet calculations began unfolding behind dozens of alien eyes. Some delegates already knew how they would vote. Others weighed alliances, obligations, and quiet advantages. At the human desk, Ambassador Okafor finished reading her document. She set the tablet down, folded her hands, and waited. From the upper tiers, Counselor Vareth watched her for a moment. She had not interrupted, had not protested, had not even looked surprised. He found that mildly disappointing. Debate, after all, made politics more interesting. But perhaps humans simply understood their place. The presiding officer activated the vote console. Delegates, the officer said, the motion will be discussed before final consideration. And slowly, one by one, the representatives of 14 civilizations prepared to speak about the future of humanity. The human ambassador remained silent. Not tense. Not angry. Just quietly attentive. As though the outcome of the discussion was already known. The first delegate to request the floor was not one of Varetha's allies. That alone caught the chamber's attention. From the third tier, a slender mechanical column extended upward as the representative of the Ardal Syndicate activated their speaking node. Their crystalline body refracted the chamber lights into shifting fragments of color as their voice emerged through the translation field. Clear, precise, and completely without emotion. Esteemed Council, the Ardal representative began, the Syndicate recognizes the procedural authority of the Thalran Union to submit such a motion. However, we request clarification regarding the operational justification for removing the Terran Confederation's observer status. A pause followed. In Council language, clarification often meant challenge. Counselor Vareth inclined his head slightly. The justification is straightforward, he replied. Observer status exists to monitor developing civilizations and prepare them for responsible participation in galactic governance. Humanity has demonstrated enthusiasm, but not the maturity required for deeper integration. Several delegates shifted subtly. The Ardal voice responded immediately. Humanity has maintained peaceful diplomatic relations with all neighboring systems. Their trade activity has expanded steadily. Their technological growth rate exceeds projected models. These metrics normally indicate readiness for expanded integration, not suspension. The chamber grew quieter. Vareth did not appear disturbed. The Syndicate is correct regarding humanity's growth, he said calmly. But growth alone does not equal stability. The Terran Confederation remains politically fragmented, its governance divided among competing planetary authorities and corporate blocs. He gestured lightly toward the human desk. Even their own ambassador does not speak for a unified species. Now several delegates looked down toward Ambassador Okafor. She remained perfectly still. The Pelagic Combine's representative activated their life support column next. Their voice carried a fluid resonance beneath the translation layer. The Combine notes that humanity has participated constructively in trade arbitration panels and infrastructure committees. A faint ripple of agreement moved through the lower tiers. Vareth raised one hand gently. Yes, he acknowledged. Humanity participates. They volunteer for committees, technical forums, maintenance groups, logistical advisory boards. He allowed the list to trail off. But participation is not authority. The subtle shift in tone was unmistakable. Observer civilizations often seek influence through procedural involvement, Vareth continued. It is natural. Ambitious species frequently attempt to accelerate their integration. The implication hung clearly in the air. Humans were ambitious. Humans were impatient. Humans were trying to climb higher than their status allowed. From the upper tiers, a low clicking sound came from the karate delegation, an insectoid gesture roughly equivalent to amusement. Finally, the presiding officer turned toward the center floor. Ambassador Okafor, the officer said, you may respond if you wish. For the first time since the session began, every gaze in the chamber focused on the human representative. Okafor looked up. Her expression remained composed. Not defensive. Not confrontational. Simply attentive. She rose slowly from her seat. Thank you, presiding officer, she said. Her voice carried easily across the chamber. Human speech patterns were simple compared to many alien languages, but the translation systems carried her words with perfect clarity. The Terran Confederation acknowledges the Thauran Union's proposal. Several delegates leaned forward slightly. Humans were known for emotional responses in diplomatic settings. Passion. Argument. Occasionally stubborn defiance. But Okafor continued with calm professionalism. We understand that the Council must periodically review observer civilizations. She paused briefly. And we recognize that membership in this institution is a privilege. The chamber remained silent. No protest. No accusation. Vareth watched carefully now. Something about her tone felt unusual. Okafor folded her hands lightly in front of her. If the Council determines that humanity's observer status should be suspended pending further review, she said, the Terran Confederation will comply fully with that decision. A faint ripple moved through the delegates. That was it. No attempt to argue. No defense. Vareth spoke again. Ambassador, he said smoothly, you seem remarkably accepting of a decision that would remove your civilization from Council proceedings. Okafor met his gaze. Humanity respects institutional processes, she replied. And the Council's rules. Her answer was technically flawless. It also contained absolutely no emotion. Vareth studied her face for several seconds. Nothing. No anger. No humiliation. Just quiet composure. The presiding officer cleared their throat. Very well. If there are no further statements, the Council will proceed to the vote. Across the 14 tiers, voting consoles illuminated simultaneously. Each delegate carried a weighted vote based on their civilization's treaty authority. Vareth already knew the outcome. He had spent weeks ensuring it. Lights began appearing across the chamber. Green, red, green, green. One by one, the votes registered into the Council's central system. On the chamber ceiling, the constellation map dimmed slightly as the result compiled. Then the final tally appeared. Motion approved. By an overwhelming margin. A low murmur spread through the delegates. The presiding officer spoke formally. By vote of the Council, the Terran Confederation's observer privileges are hereby suspended pending developmental review. The words echoed briefly through the chamber. Then silence returned. All eyes turned once again toward the human ambassador. Okafor did not react immediately. She simply tapped her tablet once. The device emitted a soft confirmation tone. Then she inclined her head politely. The Terran Confederation acknowledges the Council's decision. Her voice remained steady. No bitterness. No disappointment. Just procedural acceptance. Vareth watched her closely. Ambassador, he said, your government will receive the formal documentation shortly. Okafor nodded. We anticipated that. Something in that response caused a few delegates to exchange brief glances. But the moment passed quickly. The presiding officer continued the session agenda. Next item of Council business. But many delegates were no longer listening. Because as Okafor gathered her tablet and prepared to leave the chamber floor, several noticed something peculiar. She did not look defeated. She did not look humiliated. If anything, she looked almost relieved. And as she walked toward the chamber exit, she sent a single message through her tablet to the Terran diplomatic network. A short one. Only 4 words. Begin Phase 1 withdrawal. No alarms sounded. No protests followed. The council session continued normally. But across the vast network of human trade routes, logistics hubs, technical offices, arbitration courts, and maintenance platforms, quiet instructions began to move. And for the moment, no one in the Galactic Council noticed. The message reached Earth in 6 minutes. Not because Earth was close, but because humans had spent the last 3 decades building one of the most efficient communication relay systems in known space. Across orbital stations, trade hubs, navigation platforms, diplomatic offices, and quiet administrative centers scattered throughout hundreds of systems, encrypted signals arrived with identical instructions. The wording never changed. Begin Phase 1 withdrawal. No urgency markers. No emergency flags. Just a procedural directive. Which was exactly how the Terran Confederation preferred to operate. On Luna Station, 300,000 kilometers above Earth, the Directorate of External Operations received the instruction first. Director Adrian Vale read the message twice. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "So," he said quietly, "they finally did it." Around the command table, several senior administrators exchanged brief looks. No one appeared surprised. "We prepared for this possibility," said Chief Analyst Mariko Tanaka. Probability models placed council suspension within a 36% likelihood window. Vale nodded. "And Phase 1? Tanaka tapped her console. "Handoff notices already drafted. Service termination protocols ready. Contract clauses verified." "Good." Vale stood. "Then we proceed exactly as planned." He paused briefly before adding, "And remember the directive." Tanaka smiled faintly. "No retaliation." Vale returned the expression. "No retaliation." Across human space, thousands of small administrative actions began unfolding. None of them looked dramatic. In fact, most appeared almost boring. At the Artemis Navigation Bureau, a clerk transmitted a polite notice to the Galactic Transit Authority. Due to recent changes in diplomatic status, Terran personnel would be withdrawing from advisory roles within the Interstellar Navigation Alignment Committee. The message included a list of replacement contact points. All perfectly courteous. At the Orion Trade Mediation Office, 2 human arbitrators concluded their final dispute hearing between a mining consortium and a shipping guild. When the session ended, they sent formal letters to both parties. Human arbitration services would no longer be available for council-regulated disputes. The letters thanked them for their cooperation. At the Helios Infrastructure Consortium, engineers began transferring maintenance credentials for several deep space relay platforms back to their original council operators. The transfer documents were meticulous. Step-by-step guides, technical diagrams, support recommendations. Everything required for a smooth transition. No one complained. Why would they? The notices looked routine. In the Galactic Council chamber, meanwhile, the next agenda item had already begun. Councillor Verith listened to a debate about agricultural trade tariffs while quietly reviewing the vote statistics from earlier. The margin had been decisive. Even more decisive than he had predicted. Humans had only received 3 opposing votes. The Pelagic Combine, the Ardal Syndicate, and the Small Kelmari Cooperative. Everyone else had supported the motion. Verith allowed himself a small measure of satisfaction. It was not personal. Politics rarely was. The Council simply needed clarity regarding humanity's position in galactic affairs. Emerging civilizations often required a period of correction before proper integration. He closed the report and turned his attention back to the chamber. Humanity would continue developing, of course. Eventually they might reapply for observer status. If their political structures matured. If their institutions stabilized. If they learned patience. 3 days later, the first minor inconvenience occurred. It happened inside the Tyrannus Shipping Exchange, one of the Council's largest freight coordination centers. A karate logistics supervisor was reviewing cargo schedules when a notification appeared across his console. Transit alignment update delayed. He clicked the message irritably. Transit alignment updates normally arrived every 8 hours. They ensured that long-range cargo routes remained synchronized with stellar drift and gravitational fluctuations. Without them, ships could still navigate. But efficiency dropped. Fuel costs increased. Schedules slipped. He opened the support channel. Navigation Bureau, he clicked through the translation system. We are missing the latest alignment update. A response arrived 30 seconds later. Please contact your assigned Council Navigation Coordinator. The karate supervisor frowned. That was the Navigation Bureau. Another pause. Then the reply came. Terran Navigation Advisory Services no longer maintain that system. Your new coordinator information has been attached. The karate supervisor opened the attachment. It contained a long list of unfamiliar offices. None of them human. He clicked his mandibles in mild irritation. Reassignments always created temporary delays. Nothing unusual. 2 days later, a similar situation occurred in the Pelagic Combine's diplomatic arbitration chamber. A trade dispute had escalated between two independent transport guilds. Normally, a human mediator would have joined the hearing panel. Humans had developed a reputation for surprisingly effective conflict resolution. But when the hearing secretary attempted to summon the assigned Terran arbitrator, the request bounced. Service unavailable. The secretary reviewed the notice. Terran mediation services have withdrawn from council arbitration panels. The secretary frowned. That seems inconvenient. The presiding judge waved a fin dismissively. Assign another mediator. Elsewhere, a maintenance platform orbiting a small red star delayed its routine calibration cycle. The technician assigned to the task had always been human. Now the position was empty. It took several days before someone noticed. Another week before a replacement was scheduled. Still nothing serious. Just a few delays. A few reassignments. A few mild inconveniences. But inside the Ardell Syndicate's data archives, something unusual had begun appearing in their infrastructure reports. A crystalline analyst studied the incoming data patterns with growing curiosity. Service withdrawals. Maintenance transfers. Advisory resignations. At first the events appeared unrelated. Different sectors. Different institutions. Different systems. But when the analyst mapped the timing of the changes, a pattern slowly emerged. All of the withdrawals shared one common variable. Human personnel. The analyst tilted their crystalline body slightly, refracting the data projections into new angles. The pattern expanded. Navigation systems. Trade mediation panels. Technical maintenance teams. Infrastructure advisory boards. Environmental monitoring committees. Dozens of small roles. None individually critical. But together. The analyst ran another projection. Then another. Their internal processors began recalculating probabilities. Finally, they opened a communication channel to the Syndicate's senior council delegate. Representative, the analyst transmitted. We are observing a coordinated withdrawal of Terran personnel across multiple interstellar infrastructure systems. The delegate responded calmly. That is expected. The council suspended their observer status. Yes, the analyst replied. But the scale of withdrawal appears unusually comprehensive. A pause followed. How comprehensive? The analyst displayed the current data, and the delegate's crystalline structure dimmed slightly as the implications began to form. Across the galaxy, humanity continued withdrawing quietly. No threats. No accusations. No dramatic declarations. Just polite notices. Administrative transfers. And professional goodbyes. Most civilizations barely noticed. For the first week, nothing truly serious happened. There were delays, certainly. Transit schedules drifted by a few minutes. Cargo shipments required additional routing confirmations. A few technical committees postponed meetings while waiting for newly assigned coordinators to familiarize themselves with their responsibilities. In a civilization that spanned hundreds of star systems, such inconveniences barely registered. The Galactic Council had weathered wars, supernova evacuations, economic collapses, and first contact disasters. A few administrative adjustments meant very little. But on the 8th day, the first real anomaly appeared. It occurred in the Valoran Trade Corridor, a major shipping lane used by nearly 12,000 commercial vessels each standard cycle. The corridor passed between two dense star clusters, which created a subtle but constantly shifting gravitational environment. Navigation through the region required frequent trajectory adjustments to maintain optimal routes. For years, the system had operated smoothly. Until that morning, a cargo vessel from the Pelagic Combine reported a minor trajectory misalignment, barely noticeable, only a few hundred kilometers off its projected path. Normally, the automated navigation grid would correct such deviations instantly. This time it did not. The ship's pilot compensated manually. No damage occurred, but the pilot filed a routine report. 2 days later, 3 more vessels reported similar deviations. Not large ones, just enough to require manual corrections. The Galactic Transit Authority opened a review. Possibly delayed calibration updates, one analyst suggested. Or outdated gravitational drift data, another proposed. The problem was assigned to a maintenance team. But when the team attempted to access the corridor's calibration algorithms, they discovered something strange. The system documentation listed a Terran advisory unit as the primary alignment monitor, and that unit no longer existed. Elsewhere, a far smaller issue appeared within the Kelmari Cooperative's environmental monitoring network. Several atmospheric stations had stopped transmitting hourly data. The sensors themselves were functional. The relay system, however, required a routine synchronization command. For years, the command had been issued automatically by a small human-operated monitoring office. When the Kelmari technicians searched for the source, the office was gone. The synchronization command had never been reassigned. In the Pelagic Combine's medical research archive, a different problem emerged. A cross-species pathogen database began generating conflicting analysis results. The system was designed to compare biological threats across multiple civilizations and generate treatment protocols. It was considered one of the Council's most valuable shared resources. But recently the algorithm began producing inconsistent projections. When the archive administrators investigated, they discovered that a small Terran bioinformatics team had been responsible for maintaining the database's translation matrices. Those matrices ensured that biological data from vastly different species could be compared accurately. Without regular updates, the system's reliability slowly degraded. The team had withdrawn 3 days earlier. No replacement had been assigned. Individually, each problem was minor. A navigation delay, a monitoring lapse, an outdated algorithm. The Galactic Council managed far greater crises on a weekly basis. But as the days passed, the frequency of these small failures began to increase. Cargo lanes required manual recalculations. Maintenance platforms missed scheduled calibrations. Arbitration hearings were postponed due to the absence of trained mediators. Communication relay stations reported unusual signal congestion. At first, administrators assumed the disruptions were unrelated. After all, the galaxy was enormous. Coincidences happened constantly. Yet in quiet data centers across multiple civilizations, analysts began noticing the same pattern. Every disruption shared a single, recurring variable: the absence of Terran personnel. Inside the Ardal Syndicate's analytical core, the crystalline analyst who had first noticed the withdrawals expanded their model. The holographic projection now displayed hundreds of data points scattered across interstellar space. Navigation nodes, trade hubs, environmental monitors, medical archives, technical committees, infrastructure oversight groups. Each point marked a system where human personnel had recently withdrawn. Each point overlapped with a growing list of minor operational failures. The analyst rotated the projection slowly. A lattice of invisible connections appeared between the data. Then another layer. And another. Their processors recalculated the probability curve. It rose sharply. The analyst opened a direct channel to the Syndicate's Council delegate again. "Representative," they transmitted. "The correlation is increasing." The delegate responded cautiously. "Explain." The analyst expanded the projection until the entire Council infrastructure network filled the chamber. "These systems appear independent," the analyst said. "But they share a hidden dependency." "Which is?" The analyst highlighted dozens of small nodes scattered across the network. Human operational support. The delegate studied the projection. Those roles were advisory positions. Yes, the analyst replied. Individually. They zoomed out further. But collectively, the full network appeared, and the delegate's crystalline structure dimmed again. They form a distributed maintenance layer across multiple council systems. A long silence followed. How extensive? The delegate finally asked. The analyst paused before answering. We do not yet know. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council chamber, Councillor Verith was reviewing a routine economic report when his assistant approached quietly. There are increasing technical disruption reports across several infrastructure sectors, the assistant said. Verith looked up. Define disruption. Minor operational irregularities. He frowned slightly. Maintenance issues? That appears to be the assumption. Verith waved a hand dismissively. Assign additional technicians. Yes, Counselor. The assistant hesitated. There is one additional factor. Verith raised an eyebrow. What factor? The majority of the affected systems previously involved Terran personnel. Verith leaned back in his chair. For the first time since the vote, he felt the faintest hint of irritation. Then the council will simply replace them, he said. The assistant nodded. Of course. But as the assistant turned to leave, Verith glanced once more at the growing list of disruption reports. Navigation irregularities. Monitoring failures. Technical delays. Nothing serious. Not yet. Phil. For reasons he could not quite explain. The pattern made him uneasy. And across the galaxy, the quiet absence of human systems continued spreading. Not dramatically. Not violently. Just slowly. Like a machine beginning to forget how to run. The emergency meeting was not scheduled. In fact, the Galactic Council avoided emergency meetings whenever possible. The chamber had procedures for nearly everything: trade disputes, border conflicts, treaty negotiations, sanctions reviews. Problems were normally filtered through committees long before they reached the central council floor. But this time the committees had failed. Or more accurately, the committees themselves were beginning to malfunction. By the 17th day after humanity's suspension, the list of operational disruptions had grown too large to ignore. Cargo delays across 3 major trade corridors. Navigation alignment errors in 5 different sectors. Environmental monitoring gaps on 12 inhabited worlds. Medical database inconsistencies affecting cross-species pathogen research. Communication relay congestion in several diplomatic networks. None of these failures were catastrophic, but they were multiplying. And more troubling than the failures themselves was the pattern emerging behind them. Which was why the Ardal Syndicate formally requested an emergency session of the Council. The chamber filled faster than usual that day. Delegates arrived with little ceremony, their movements sharper, their private conversations more urgent. Data tablets glowed across the tiers as representatives reviewed the growing list of system irregularities. At the center floor, the human desk remained empty. The Terran Confederation no longer had permission to attend council proceedings. Councillor Verith noticed the empty seat immediately. He told himself it was irrelevant. But the sight of it bothered him more than he expected. The presiding officer activated the chamber's translation fields. This emergency session has been requested by the Ardal Syndicate to present new information regarding current infrastructure disruptions. The officer gestured toward the 3rd tier. Representative Ardal, the chamber recognizes you. The crystalline delegate rose slowly. Unlike most council speeches, there was no preamble. No ceremonial greetings. Just a direct projection of data into the chamber's central holographic display. Thousands of small lights appeared in the air. Star systems. Trade hubs. Navigation nodes. Monitoring stations. Medical networks. Technical committees. Every light represented a system currently experiencing operational degradation. A quiet murmur spread across the chamber. The number alone was alarming. But then the Ardal representative spoke. These disruptions share a common factor. The projection shifted. A second layer of lights appeared beside the first. These marked locations where human personnel had previously served within Council operations. Advisory roles, maintenance support, arbitration panels, technical coordination teams. The two maps began aligning, one over the other. Light after light overlapped. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder. The Ardal delegate continued calmly. For the past 41 years, humanity has participated in Council activities primarily through technical and administrative committees. Another projection appeared. A list of organizations scrolled slowly through the air. Interstellar Navigation Alignment Group, Trade Mediation Network, Cross-Species Medical Database Initiative, Environmental Stability Monitoring Consortium, Deep Relay Communication Authority, Infrastructure Coordination Council. Dozens more followed. Human representatives volunteered extensively for these committees, the delegate said. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Yes. Humans had volunteered frequently. They had always seemed eager to participate. Helpful, even. Perhaps overly enthusiastic. The Ardal delegate rotated the projection again. Now the chamber saw something else. Each committee contained small human teams. 2 engineers here. 3 analysts there. A mediator assigned to arbitration panels. A technician managing relay synchronization. Individually, the roles looked minor, almost insignificant. But when connected together, a network appeared. A vast, invisible infrastructure layer spanning hundreds of systems. Gasps rippled across several tiers. The Ardal delegate delivered the final analysis with quiet precision. Human personnel were not merely participating in Council operations. The projection zoomed out one final time. The network expanded across the chamber, sealing like a constellation. They were maintaining them. Silence followed. A heavy, uncomfortable silence. Councillor Verith stood slowly. That conclusion is exaggerated, he said carefully. The Ardal representative turned toward him. Our analysis suggests otherwise. Verith stepped forward slightly. Are you implying that the Galactic Council's infrastructure depends on Terran administrative support? The Ardal delegate paused, then answered, No. Another projection appeared. A simulation. Systems failing gradually over time. Navigation drift increasing. Trade disputes escalating without arbitration. Medical research slowing due to database inconsistencies. Environmental monitoring gaps expanding. Communication congestion rising. The timeline extended forward. Weeks. Months. Years. Finally, the delegate spoke again. We are not implying dependence. They allowed the simulation to continue. We are demonstrating it. The chamber erupted into overlapping voices. Delegates began speaking at once. This is impossible. Our systems existed long before humanity arrived. Why were these roles never formally documented? Who authorized such distributed oversight? The presiding officer struck the floor with the ceremonial staff. Order! Slowly the noise subsided. The Ardal representative waited patiently, then continued. Humanity integrated itself into Council operations through voluntary technical participation. They accepted minor responsibilities that other civilizations considered administrative. Another list appeared. Routine calibration checks, data synchronization tasks, algorithm maintenance, mediation scheduling, infrastructure diagnostics, small jobs, unimportant jobs. The delegate concluded the explanation quietly. No individual role appeared critical. The chamber stared at the projection. But collectively, the network pulsed once. They stabilized a significant portion of Council infrastructure. Councillor Verith felt something cold settle in his chest. He reviewed the map again. Navigation, trade arbitration, medical databases, monitoring systems, communication relays, all quietly supported by small Terran teams, and all now withdrawing simultaneously. He finally asked the question none of them wanted answered. How long until system degradation becomes serious? The Ardal analyst's voice entered the chamber remotely. Our models estimate increasing disruption over the next several months. They paused, then added, however, certain systems may begin failing much sooner. The chamber fell silent again, because suddenly, the earlier inconveniences looked very different. They were not random failures. They were the first cracks in a structure no one realized humanity had been holding together. And for the first time since the vote, the Galactic Council began to understand what they had actually removed. The realization did not bring calm discussion. It brought panic. Within hours of the Ardal Syndicate's presentation, the Galactic Council chamber transformed from a place of measured diplomacy into something far more chaotic. Delegates who normally spoke with careful restraint now argued openly across the chamber tiers. The projection of the Terran infrastructure network still hung above them like a silent accusation. Every flashing node represented something the Council had assumed would simply continue working. Now those nodes were disappearing one by one. The presiding officer struck the ceremonial staff again. Order! The Council will proceed with rational discussion. But rational discussion was becoming increasingly difficult. From the karate delegation came a harsh clicking sound. This situation is unacceptable, their representative declared. Critical navigation systems cannot be allowed to degrade simply because one minor civilization withdrew its personnel. The Pelagic Combine responded immediately. They withdrew because we removed them from Council participation. That is irrelevant, the karate replied. The infrastructure belongs to the Council. From the upper tiers, the Ardal delegate spoke calmly. The infrastructure belongs to the organizations operating it. The chamber quieted slightly. Many of those organizations, the Ardal representative continued, contracted Terran personnel through voluntary agreements. Several delegates began reviewing their data tablets again. The contracts were real, and they contained a clause no one had paid much attention to before. Termination upon diplomatic status change. Human administrators had written it into nearly every service agreement. At the time it seemed like standard legal language. Now it looked disturbingly deliberate. Councillor Vareth stood slowly. For the first time since the crisis began, his composure showed cracks. Then the solution is simple, he said. We restore communication with the Terran Confederation and request their continued cooperation during the transition. A few delegates nodded immediately. Yes, the Pelagic representative agreed. Human personnel can remain in place while replacements are trained. Another delegate added, their suspension from observer status does not prohibit cooperation. Vareth turned toward the presiding officer. Send a diplomatic message to the Terran Confederation immediately. The officer nodded. Channeling now. A communication signal launched from the Council's central relay network. It traveled across multiple relay stations and reached the Terran diplomatic network within minutes. The chamber waited. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the reply arrived. The presiding officer opened the message and frowned. What is it? Vareth asked. The officer read the message once more before answering. It is an automated response. Then read it. The officer did. This communication channel is restricted to recognized Council participants and registered diplomatic observers. The Terran Confederation currently holds neither status. Please direct inquiries through appropriate authorized representatives. The chamber went silent. Vareth blinked. That must be a mistake. The officer checked again. The response is correct according to Council protocol. A murmur of disbelief spread across the tiers. They are refusing Council contact. No, the Ardal delegate said quietly. They are following Council rules. Several heads turned toward them. The crystalline representative continued calmly. When the Council suspended Terran observer status, it also revoked their diplomatic communication privileges within the Council network. Vareth felt his irritation spike. Then we will simply send a direct message to Earth. The officer nodded again. Attempting external diplomatic contact. Another signal launched. Again, the chamber waited. And again, a response arrived quickly. The officer's expression darkened slightly this time. Well, Vareth demanded. The officer read the message aloud. The Terran Confederation acknowledges receipt of your transmission. However, according to Galactic Council Resolution 4472-B, the Terran Confederation is currently classified as a non-participating external civilization. As such, official Council diplomatic communications cannot be processed through standard channels. The message continued. If the Council wishes to establish independent contact, please submit the appropriate external request documentation through the Interstellar Relations Office. Estimated processing time, 8 to 12 weeks. The chamber erupted again. 8 weeks. Navigation failures are already increasing. This is bureaucratic insanity. The presiding officer raised their staff again, but the room barely responded. Finally, Councillor Verith spoke again. This is absurd. He stepped closer to the chamber floor. They know the situation. They know the Council requires their assistance. The Ardal delegate turned toward him. Perhaps. Then why delay? The crystalline representative paused before answering. Because they are no longer obligated to respond. That statement landed harder than anything else spoken that day. Verith turned slowly toward the empty human desk. For 41 years, humanity had attended council sessions from that small seat. Quietly, patiently, volunteering for committees no one else wanted. Taking responsibility for small technical tasks. Offering mediation in disputes most civilizations considered beneath them. And now, they were gone. The Council had removed them. And humanity had simply followed the rules. Exactly. Perfectly. The presiding officer finally spoke again. There may be another option. The chamber turned toward them. While humanity cannot receive official council communication, individual civilizations may still contact them independently. The implication was clear. The council could not request help. But someone else could. Veritha's jaw tightened. You are suggesting we ask as private entities? The officer inclined their head. Yes. For several long seconds, the chamber remained silent. Because the meaning of that suggestion was obvious. The Galactic Council, an institution that had governed interstellar diplomacy for centuries, would have to ask humanity for help. Not as superiors. Not as judges. But as equals. And perhaps, even as petitioners. 3 days passed before anyone was willing to do it. Not because the Council lacked the means to contact humanity, but because no civilization wanted to be the first to ask. For centuries, the Galactic Council had been the center of authority. Civilizations petitioned the Council. Disputes were brought before the Council. Trade agreements required Council approval. The idea that the Council itself might need to request assistance from a recently suspended observer civilization felt humiliating. But while pride stalled diplomacy, the galaxy continued drifting slowly toward disorder. Navigation updates fell another 6 hours behind schedule. 2 trade convoys reported near-collision corrections in the Valoran corridor. The cross-species medical database issued an advisory warning that its pathogen modeling accuracy had dropped below 70%. And several environmental monitoring arrays across inhabited worlds were now missing entire days of atmospheric data. Still manageable. Still recoverable. But clearly worsening. Finally, the Ardal Syndicate acted. Unlike most Council civilizations, the Ardal did not experience embarrassment in the same way biological species did. Their decisions were driven almost entirely by analytical efficiency. And their analysis showed a simple truth. Waiting was irrational. So the Ardal delegate transmitted a direct message to Earth. Not through the Council network. Not through diplomatic command channels. Just a simple interstellar communication packet addressed to the Terran Confederation's Department of External Coordination. The message contained only one line. The Ardal Syndicate requests dialogue regarding infrastructure stabilization. No threats. No demands. Just a request. The response arrived in 23 minutes. 2 days later, Councillor Verith entered the Galactic Council chamber again. This time the room felt very different. The debates were quieter. The conversations more cautious. And everyone knew exactly why they had gathered. At the center floor, the human desk was no longer empty. Ambassador Layla Okafor sat calmly behind it, reading from the same slim tablet she had carried the day of humanity's suspension. When Verith entered, she looked up briefly. Their eyes met. She gave a polite nod. Nothing more. No anger. No satisfaction. Just the same professional composure she had always displayed. The presiding officer called the chamber to order. This session has been convened to address infrastructure stability concerns raised by several council members. They turned toward the human ambassador. Ambassador Okafor, the council acknowledges the Terran Confederation's presence. Okafor stood. Thank you, presiding officer. Her voice was calm. Exactly as it had been the day the council removed humanity from observer status. Verith stepped forward slightly. Ambassador, he began carefully, recent disruptions across several council infrastructure systems have raised concerns regarding the withdrawal of Terran technical personnel. Okafor inclined her head. Yes. We are aware. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. Verith continued. Those systems are vital to the stability of interstellar operations. Their degradation benefits no one. That is correct, Okafor agreed. Then surely, Verith said, the Terran Confederation would be willing to assist the Council while replacement personnel are trained. The chamber held its breath. Okafor remained silent for a moment. Then she tapped her tablet. A projection appeared above the chamber floor. It displayed hundreds of contracts, service agreements, technical advisories, infrastructure maintenance arrangements, all bearing the same small signature line. Terran Confederation Cooperative Services. These agreements, Okafor said calmly, were established over the past 4 decades between Terran personnel and various council organizations. The projection shifted. Every contract displayed the same clause. Termination upon diplomatic status change. Several delegates looked away. Okafor continued. When the council suspended Terran observer status, those agreements automatically concluded. Verith nodded stiffly. We understand that, which is why we are requesting their temporary renewal. Okafor met his gaze. Under the previous conditions? Verith hesitated. Yes. She shook her head slightly. I'm afraid that will not be possible. A murmur moved through the chamber. The presiding officer spoke carefully. Ambassador, are you refusing to assist the council? Okafor's expression remained calm. Not at all. She tapped her tablet again. The projection changed. This time it displayed a new document. Terran Confederation Infrastructure Partnership Framework. Humanity is fully willing to provide infrastructure stabilization services, she said, but only under updated agreements reflecting our current status. Verith narrowed his eyes. And what status is that? Okafor answered simply. Partner. The chamber went silent. The document expanded. Its terms were clear. Human infrastructure teams would return to stabilize navigation systems, restore monitoring networks, and recalibrate medical databases. But in exchange, humanity would receive full council membership consideration. Terran infrastructure organizations would operate as independent contracted partners, not volunteer advisory teams. And all future council systems would include shared oversight authority with human technical institutions. In short, the quiet volunteers who had spent 40 years maintaining the galaxy's hidden infrastructure would now do so openly, and with equal standing. Verith studied the proposal for a long time. He could feel the eyes of 14 civilizations watching him, watching the man who had argued for humanity's removal. Finally, he looked up at Okafor. You anticipated this outcome. It was not a question. Okafor answered anyway. We prepared for it. Verith glanced at the growing list of system disruptions still appearing across the chamber displays. Navigation drift increasing. Monitoring networks degrading. Medical databases failing. The Council could eventually rebuild those systems. But it would take years. And the cost would be enormous. He looked back at the human ambassador. Humanity spent decades maintaining these systems. Yes. Why? Okafor smiled faintly. Because stability benefits everyone. She paused. Even when it isn't appreciated. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, Councillor Verith inclined his head. The Thauran Union will support the partnership proposal. One by one, the other delegates followed. Not enthusiastically, but inevitably, because the galaxy needed its systems back. And humanity had just demonstrated something none of them had fully understood before. Humans were not powerful because of fleets, or weapons, or political influence. They were powerful because they had quietly built themselves into the foundation of galactic stability. And when that foundation stepped away, the entire structure began to shake. At the center desk, Ambassador Okafor closed her tablet. Across the galaxy, Terran technicians began preparing to return. But this time, they would not be volunteers. They would be partners. And the Galactic Council would never underestimate humanity again.